everyone, and welcome to Wowhead Weekly number 294. Today is Happy Raid Day, at least for NA people. For us in EU, we gotta wait until tomorrow, but it does mean that we now have access to watch the raid and see what's going on. And by seeing the raid being cleared on normal, we also got access to a new cinematic, which is super exciting. We're gonna dive into the cinematic, show it to you guys, and also talk about it. And that's the reason that the show was slightly delayed, but we are here and we're ready to talk about it. So, actually, before I get too excited, let me introduce myself. I'm Annie, or also known as Annie Fuchsia, and I do this show weekly with my lovely co-host Perculia.
Perk. I'm joined by Brightpaw, who is apparently eating my necklace. I am the site director for Wowhead. Lots of behind the scenes management of news and guides for all of Wowhead's divisions, and it's always nice to do this show and be in front of the camera for a change and talk about the most important things on the site. So
Mm-hmm.
thank you for all your support with 9.2 with all of our Zereth Mortis and class guides. And yeah, we should have a fun show doing a deep dive on the Anduin cinematic that we just got.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's
yeah.
funny that we kind of meet halfway here because you have all the background things, all the knowledge, all the lore,
Yeah.
everything, and then you bring it here. Every once in a while
Yep.
in front of a camera, and then there's me always streaming, always in front of a camera,
Yeah.
and not knowing the details of everything, and then we just go here, meet
Yeah.
halfway together, and talk to you guys who might be anywhere between the whole spectrum of types of
Yeah.
people. So it's perfect.
Yeah.
It's awesome to be able to do this. But yeah, so we
Yeah.
have a cinematic. Do we start straight away with that, or is there maybe something small we'd like to mention
Yeah, I
first?
think maybe just warm up, reminding people that season 3 starts today. And
Mm-hmm.
the reason we have a cinematic is because there is a new raid as part of the season. Sepulchre, the first 8 bosses are open today.
Mm-hmm.
Mythic Plus, the new season, as well as PvP.
Yep.
And the interesting thing is that we have this cinematic and very difficult Anduin encounter because they're treating Anduin almost like he's the end boss of the raid, even though he is a middle boss, boss 8, because the last 3 bosses are a total surprise, untested, and they will be revealed for the first time next week.
Next week.
So
Mm-hmm.
this week is only the first 8 on normal and heroic, and then next week Mythic opens in addition to the last 3 bosses on normal and heroic.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
So
It's the first time that this has been done. As far as I can remember, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but having 8 bosses available and having an extra 3 bosses completely secret. The closest thing I can remember from that is maybe when Raden was kept as a
yeah,
secret, as a +1 at the end. But this is 3 bosses, untested, nobody knows what's going to happen, and it's honestly quite exciting to see how that's going
yeah.
to be tackled.
Especially when it goes hand in hand with not knowing what the next expansion is. Normally, when we have the final raid, we already know the name of the expansion, even if data mining hasn't started yet, and we don't know what's coming next. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
normally people, like, when they hear the name of the expansion, they try to, like, connect the dots, like, how we're going to go from, like, Nizoth to Shadowlands or, Antorus to Battle for Azeroth, and, with this, we don't know where it's going, just the jailer sounds very ominous.
Yep,
So,
indeed.
yeah. One thing that we
Mm-hmm.
wanted to briefly mention, I think, before the cinematic was how, like, just sort of how the raid race is shaping up, because those guys don't have the last 3 bosses. They're going in cold to them. And it's people are also very interested in the return of tier sets and are spending lots of gold on it, which is
Oh
very
yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The
So
top guilds are definitely making use of this to try to get as much of an advantage as possible. I'm not even sure if I can call it an advantage because if everyone is trying to do the same thing, it's more like a requirement. Um, but yeah, there's been some interesting posts going around where guilds like Team Liquid is offering a lot of gold for people to be able to trade certain pieces of gear, which is interesting. Let me show you guys a picture of here of one of their advertisements. We
Seeing
need
a
your
lot.
help.
Yeah. Like that's insane. Like it's like signed jerseys and like a chair and 10 million gold. Like that is a lot of equivalent of money.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. 2 million gold for
And
normal tier set, 4 million gold for heroic tier set. It's yeah, it's crazy.
yeah, and I'm seeing a lot of other guilds like well, I guess not a lot, but all these serious contenders are trying to uh increase their budget, offering more as well, increasing their rates. And it's definitely interesting because, Blizzard tried to stagger some pieces like, double legendary would be available after progression, I think to avoid some of the gear min maxing. And now we have this very expensive, very elaborate recruiting effort for, tier pieces. And it's definitely a sense of like, is there like a pay to win or like budget effort needed to participate in the race to world first now? Like, do you have to do this massive uh gear tier trading effort in order to have a serious chance of competing now? And what does that mean for the scene overall if um maybe the guilds that already have personalities can pull this off, but what does it mean for the scene in general if there's like no fresh blood that can join because they need to do this very elaborate loot prep.
And this comes from, I think the main reason for this happening is because trading is not possible unless you
Mm,
already have an item in a specific slot,
right.
right? So that's
Which is
why
why it's
there's
so expensive.
yeah, so that's why you need to have looted something so that you can join next time and then be able to trade it. So one thing that would potentially stop this from needing to be necessary would be if Blizzard changed it so that you can trade whatever you want, master looter.
Right.
Because then people would start running these things more internally instead of having massive purchases across many servers, trying to find the right guy who's going to be willing to trade, and then you have to pay him. And I'm not sure if this affects the overall health of things in general, but it does make it quite daunting for these world first raiders, and especially like you said, for guilds who don't have an influencer type of reputation,
Mm,
because then they can't find people who will do the same thing for them. Even if they're offering gold, maybe even offering more gold, it's still going to be hard for them to find people because they have less exposure. So
yeah.
for the possibility of more guilds to get out there, I think it would be better to bring back Master Looter. And for the rest of us, I don't
Mm,
think it affects us too much because we're talking about trading loot between people who have looted certain pieces of gear. It's very likely that these people will join and not even loot anything. So they won't even be able to
right.
trade anything. So, Team Liquid is paying millions of gold for nothing a lot of the time because it's all RNG. And
Hmm.
yeah, it's an interesting, it's definitely an interesting situation to witness. This being such a big sales situation.
Yeah, and it also is interesting with raid balance then because these guilds are defeating
Yep.
bosses with, the potential to have like, a lot more tier pieces than your average person guild would when they reach that boss. And yeah, it's just interesting how I think that Blizzard moved in one direction that was interesting by not having the end bosses be tested. But then, like, in the meantime, we have like this, gigantic overblown loot effort,
Yeah.
happening that seems to kind of detract from the spirit of like, strategizing and analytics. So I don't know, maybe Blizzard can think of some changes with 10.0 to kind of like direct the focus back onto um the fights, and also make it seem less daunting for groups to join, because right, like now you need to like have an influencer, then you need to be signed by an organization so you can like foot the bill for all just spending
Yeah.
millions and maybe not even getting loot.
Yep.
It I definitely think that Blizzard should maybe try to like control or shape the dynamic again, because I know they've always been like, oh, the world first is like a community driven event, and it's like, well, you created the situation that people are having as their sandbox. Maybe you could try to shape it a bit better.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
Indeed.
Um, but
I,
yeah, next
I
week will be really interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say there's a comment about how being happy with personal loot due to less drama and heroic raids, and I completely agree with that as well. And I think the
Mhm.
simple solution is to give Master Looter as an option. Maybe how they did it before when it was just introduced, where you could only use Master Looter if it was primarily guild members,
Mm.
or maybe some kind of like checkup at the beginning that everyone agrees with it, but not just secretly do it during trash by a scummy raid leader.
Mm.
I think it can work out to give the option to have Master Looter. In general, I do think personal loot is really good for general pugging and general playing, and you can see that very clearly. Or I could see that very clearly when having communities on both retail and both classic WoW. Classic WoW has led to a lot more drama and issues compared to retail, and I think loot is normally the core of the problem.
Yeah. Say that next week will be really interesting, right, Paul, because you won't just have the early mythic race to world first going on. You're also going to have people seeing the end three bosses on normal and heroic for the first time. So there was likely going to be a jailer cinematic. Maybe there'll be some like post raid dialogue with some important characters going on. Maybe we'll finally get a hint about what comes next with the expansion. Jailer probably won't go out without a fight. So I think that there will definitely be a lot to discuss at the start of next week. So hopefully it should be an exciting time for WoW. I know there's lots of like other games that have been coming out. So maybe Blizzard was driven by that, trying to be clever and saying, well, if we stagger things out and hide what these bosses look like, um, that can bring like, more hype to our game at this busy time. So,
Yeah, yeah. I really hope that it works out well. I think a lot of people
mm.
worry that it's gonna mean we're gonna get a lot of buggy fights and
Beta
nothing's gonna be
testing.
working.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like beta
NA
testing
beta
live.
testing. Yep.
Yeah, we definitely don't want that to happen. I think that would be a catastrophe. So hopefully, if bugs do happen, which they can happen, that they're fixed immediately and very quickly. I hope that they have people round the clock the first 24 hours at least to make sure that it's working as it should.
Yeah, something that's been kind of funny to see is that there's been a lot of like last minute tuning hot fixes for boss encounters and like notable pieces of loot. And it's just funny if, like when a guild is like, oh, we're offering like lots of gold for this item. And then Blizzard's like, we've decided to, like nerf this dagger, just out
Yeah,
of the blue. Um,
yeah.
um,
Yeah,
but
hopefully
yeah,
not
so why don't,
not too much tuning on gear needed. Like once you have
yeah,
it, it should be
hopefully.
done. Hopefully.
Yeah, or I don't know, hopefully Blizzard won't be like, "Oh, we didn't expect everyone to have all these set bonuses already through trading, and now some specs are OP or have buggy interactions we didn't think we'd have to deal with, in week 2. We gotta,
Yeah.
fix stuff now." Um, but yeah, we can discuss that more next week when we start seeing how all these, the results of this tier farming works out. But for now, I think we should focus on the Anduin cinematic,
Mhm.
which was why we delayed the show.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so for context, Anduin is the 8th boss, the final boss of week 1. I believe Blizzard stated that they viewed Anduin as like an end boss, like, and that's why he got basically he's the end of this week. He's not just a middle boss. He's a very challenging fight. Had his own cinematic. Um, And yeah, he was no joke on normal mode. It was a very intense encounter that took Gil's, several hours to get down, even on normal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he even got kind of buffed at the last minute compared to the PTR. And yeah, I mean, it was just, basically Anduin has all these like Death Knight abilities, like, acting like Arthas, whose like spirit shows up at certain points, and yeah, just not what you expect for boss 8 in a raid. So that
Mm-hmm.
was a really cool encounter to watch, and like the music was very moving, and hearing Anduin trying to like beg and ask for help, and then his friends, the other NPCs trying to help him. Like it was very like visual to watch and very emotional. So I think that from a viewer perspective, it was a fun encounter to experience for sure. And then at the end, there was a cinematic
Yeah.
showing the final moments of the fight where Anduin has been defeated and is struggling. You know, he's trying to break free, but the jailer is trying to get him to, kill himself and take everyone, else out with him in, one final burst of domination magic. So why don't we play this? The
Mm-hmm.
cinematic is up on Blizzard's YouTube channel, and then we can discuss this a lot. Maybe we'll even watch certain parts a few times, just because there's a lot of details here.
Yep.
Kind of like
Indeed.
two cinematics put together.
Yes, actually that's a good way of putting it. It really is. But let's check it out in case there's some of you guys who haven't seen it, or if you need a refresher. Um, it's quite a bit to take in. So let's
Mm.
get started.
You not understand. This one is bound to me.
Anduin!
Fulfill your final purpose. Annihilation. The fate of all who carry my blade.
My son. This blade does not belong to darkness. It was forged by valor.
And also by honor.
Its legacy and ours are with you, even here.
Now, let it be finished. Arthas.
Is this all that remains of him?
The last flicker of his scarred spirit, consumed in the forges of the jailer.
No crown, no throne, not even a soul left for judgment. I hated you, hunted you, and with each selfish act became you. That is my burden to bear. But your legacy is at an end. Be gone then, Arthas Menethil. May the last whisper of your name fade and be forgotten.
All right.
Oh,
There it is.
yeah.
There it
So
is.
I think the part with Anduin was really good, gave me chills. The Sylvanas monologuing to a wisp, I feel like that could have been its own cinematic or less so. So yeah, that's why I sort of feel like it's two cinematics together. But
Yeah,
I thought the first half was super strong. And
absolutely.
yeah, let's start with that first. But yeah, what were your thoughts? Like, what did you think of this?
I agree with the two part cinematic feeling because you start with this first part which is a lot of chills and shocking, you know, having Anduin and then having these spirits, I guess they're spirits
Mm.
of Varian and Sarfang, and just the whole thing together felt very powerful because
Mm.
both Varian and Sarfang were have been loved characters, and so it was a very powerful moment. And then when everything kind of breaks there, it kind of it's as if like the cinematic changes to a second
Yeah.
cinematic, as if it forgot like Enderman is right there, you know, and
Yeah.
then it's instead it tries to focus on Sylvanas, and it does feel a little bit off there. I think it's still I think it was still a nice atmosphere. I think there's something about the music that makes it feel very good. I think the music gives it a very like chills feeling, even if what's happening isn't maybe the most exciting. I'm feeling a little bit conflicted about the ending with Arthas and everything, and Sylvanas talking
Yeah.
about it. But maybe we
So
can
like,
jump into different parts specifically to talk
yeah.
about, or I don't know how you want
Yeah.
to do it.
So why don't we start with the Anduin thing, because like that was super powerful, and like that's what I keep thinking about, because like when I saw Varian I was like, yay,
Yeah,
like
like
beloved
finally.
characters, like chills.
We've been waiting.
Yeah, so the part that stands out to me that I think I'm like the most emotional about with the Anduin thing is that like Anduin has always been like struggling with his legacy as a ruler that is very different than his father, you know, who was a famous warrior, and Anduin has always taken like the diplomacy approach, and then Anduin formed that unlikely relationship, you know, with Sourfang, the political alliance, you know, trying to have Alliance and Horde work together in BFA. And like I just thought that it just was very emotional to see these two characters that are very different from Anduin come back and like give him support and basically say that, you know, they believe in him, not like
Mm-hmm.
Anduin go be a badass death knight, but it's like, you know, go be, you know, your diplomatic, you know, peaceful, you know, light priest paladin self. And uh I just thought that was like a very emotional moment, seeing how, you know, you have these two warriors
Mm-hmm.
supporting like a healer, and one is alliance, one is horde. Like even Sourfang had on his son's necklace that was very prominently displayed.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought it was a good like show of solidarity, um you know, just showing that no, you know, Anduin is not just, you know, this husk for domination magic, and no, his sword is not, you know, forged by the jailer, but it has this long and storied history, and it belonged to Varian. So, you know, that whole thing was very emotional. I kind of just love Varian showing up and being like, "No, jailer, you're wrong.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
this was my weapon. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah.
know, like you don't get to say this is yours."
Yeah,
So,
no, it did give super chills with Varian and Sarfang. The imagery, the music as well. The imagery of the of the hands on the sword from both sides, and it's also now that I think about it afterwards, Varian and Sarfang and Horde and Alliance also in a way coming together for this moment, and the music building it up to a sort of explosive moment, and it's really nicely well put together. It feels good. I think it was really what's the word? Really successful in showing
yeah.
what it wanted to. It was
Yeah,
very well
like
done.
I think that Anduin is a character that might not seem as flashy on the surface as Sylvanas, but he has this like quiet strength at uniting groups that would otherwise be opposites. Like even how he was able to have Sylvanas, change her perspective, and now Sylvanas is standing with Uther and Jaina to, help rescue him. And I think that the moment of seeing, Alliance and Horde, warriors urging Anduin, to, you know, be his, paladin priest self, I think that that was just very effective. I also got chills before the Varian reveal because we have the jailer speaking through Anduin, basically being like, oh,
Oh yeah.
Anduin, your final purpose. And the word final was interesting because it's like, did the jailer plan to have, and like, was this Anduin's fate? Was he meant to like self destruct, at the end of his encounter and take everyone down? Like, did his purpose end, in defeat? And so, it's like annihilation. And then the visuals look very similar to Arthas with Frostmourne, because like Anduin is about to do like a massive, defile, and he puts his, sword in front of him as he's kneeling down. And then when you hear the words "my son," my mind went to, Arthas, my son. I'm like, oh no, is this gonna be like Arthas, empowering Anduin? Like I
Yeah.
was worried that we were going to have Anduin getting some sort of twisted motivation to unleash some, massive burst of energy, and then I'm like, oh no, good, it's
Phew.
Varian
Yeah.
instead. um, but yeah, I just that part to me was just very, very very meaningful. Um, and also just if you look at his face and eyes and how you even before the armor shatters, how you see the humanity kind of like get back into them, how they're not just blue, like you see like his pupils more, and how he's looking
When
at
he's
these
looking
father
back.
figures.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I also think that it was emotional because for a while in WoW we didn't really have different generations interacting, and then in BFA we had Jaina reuniting with her mom and Sourfang reflecting on the loss of his son. And in Legion, Anduin really steps it up as a king when he finally goes to the Broken Shore to see where Varian died, and that's when he actually gets the weapons. So I think it always seems meaningful when WoW tries to, you know, reunite families in
Completely agree.
some way with
Yeah.
these father figures, because we were saying that we wanted more of that with Bolvar and Talia, how that felt like a missed opportunity. So
Yeah.
I like when Varian can, show up and give guidance to Anduin, and it'd probably be meaningful for Sourfang as well, because, Sourfang lost one son to the Lich King, which we now know was, acting under the jailer, and maybe his spirit is like, I'm saving Anduin, who was like, kind of like another uh, young ruler, child to him. So I don't know about the metaphysics. Like, I don't know, like, if these characters like exist in the Shadowlands in some form, but I think that like spiritually, it kind of makes sense how I can see that Sourfang would feel like maybe he was like able to change fate in a way that he couldn't for his son being controlled by the Lich King.
I like how you're talking about
Yeah.
not knowing how the metaphysics works. It's like
Yeah.
we need a quick course on this, Blizzard. Like, can we get one?
No, because I'm like, wait, because like Sourfang was that trinket that dropped from Sylvanas, and it's like, did Varian go to the Shadowlands, or because he died at the hands of demons, did he like just get disenchanted? And Sour,
Disenchanted.
like did Sourfang
Yeah.
when he died, like would he just have gone to the Maw because that was late in BFA? Like when I think about that too much, I get a little like I'm unsure if it makes sense,
Yeah.
but I think that like spiritually, even if it's not literally like they're like actual like Shadowlands Covenant spirits, that Anduin drawing upon like their faith and their memories, like it doesn't need to be like literal
Yeah.
Shadowlands death physics. It can just be like, you know,
True.
Anduin still had some of his humanity remaining and remembered these two important
No, it
father
could all be
figures to
happening in
him.
the brain. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think it was happening. in his brain. Although it would be interesting. I mean, I think Varian and Sourfang are great characters, so obviously it would be cool if we could have seen more of them or just had known what had happened to them. But
Yeah, agreed.
yeah,
There were definitely characters I've been looking forward to see in Shadowlands since Shadowlands was released or announced. So, but it seems like with Arthas now as the third
oh, I had one
person
more
here.
quick thing. One more quick thing about Andor before we move to the Arthas bit.
All right. Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I was going to
Yes, it gives
say
me
that.
two cinematics.
Yeah,
Let's finish first cinematic.
yeah,
Okay, let's go.
yeah. So, Anduin finally gets empowered and breaks free, right? And
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting for two reasons. The first is that when he rips off his domination armor and he's back into his alliance gear, and if you look at the sword, it is now the two swords again, um, as opposed to just one. And the blade needs to like accept you in order
Oh
to do
yeah.
that. So I think it's a good show of his like willpower
The
that
two swords.
he was able to do that. And Varian did the same thing when he was fighting the demons right before his death. So I think that the sword splitting and then the sword is back to its usual appearance shows that it just sort of shows that like Anduin has really put like a lot of effort into this. It just shows like how desperate he was to break free. um
Yeah.
so that was, and I also just thought it came full circle because in 9-1, in the Sanctum raid, when Anduin leaves, he drops the compass, Varian's compass, as a way to let people know what's up. He puts the message in the compass. Um, and now we see Anduin with, he picked up the compass on the Broken Shore, and now we see him with the swords that he felt worthy enough to pick up when his father had the past vision to him on the Broken Shore. So I like how it kind of came full circle
Full
to that
circle.
moment in Legion again, because Legion was the
Yeah.
only other time we saw Varian like come to Anduin in a vision and like empower him.
It's actually a really
Um,
nice. I think I'm gonna pull an image for this
yeah,
so people can see here right after it splits. Actually, looks really good. And the music, straight as that happens as well, is so good.
yeah,
Here, let me show a picture. There you go. And we can see in the background how Jaina is a bit cautious, and she can probably see how he's changed, and his color and everything is kind of back to regular, but she's still a little bit worried about it.
yeah. Like how is he going to act? Because remember how in Bastion,
Sorry, the cinematic was playing in the background.
I'm sorry.
Okay, now the volume should be good. Apologies, I didn't realize that the sound was playing. But here we go. Here's the image. Hopefully you could still hear our comments. But yeah, I was mentioning about Jaina being cautious, seeing that Anduin has probably turned into himself again, but maybe not 100% sure. So she's, walking up to
Because
him
we have seen
carefully.
Anduin in 9-1 looking like his normal self when he did the ambush on Bastion. So you can see why Jaina would maybe be cautious that this was like
Yeah,
some sort of
exactly.
illusion. The final thing I wanted to mention about Anduin is that we have a lot of visual indicators that he's back to his normal self mostly. Like we have the armor, we've got the weapons that are split, they're now glowing light again. But he does look, exhausted, and there's no real follow up as to how Anduin psychologically is doing, which I guess is a transition to the second part. Like, I thought maybe it wouldn't have been flashy, although the second part of the cinematic is not flashy, but we don't really see Anduin, like, grapple with what he went through at the hands of the jailer. Like, we have this whole cinematic where, like, Sylvanas goes unconscious and then, like, has an argument, with herself and relives horrors she did. But it seems like Anduin is mostly himself, but it's like, is he experiencing any trauma or
Mm-hmm.
guilt,
Like we don't know
or
what he's thinking. Mm-hmm.
yeah, is he gonna reckon with Sylvanas over something? He just acted in a very un-Anduin way, acting like a Death Knight. Does he have any of those characteristics remaining in him? There were hints that in like 8-3 that he could harness the shadow. Is this going to be something that maybe he will have to struggle with now? Like, is he idealistic, after seeing these visions of his father and being like, I dropped the compass and they came, this worked out? Or
Mm-hmm.
um does he have some reckoning? Has his perspective on diplomacy changed?
Changed.
And
Mm-hmm.
so when I saw this in 127 and I saw there was like a minute left in the cinematic, I'm like, oh, I was like, I was preparing, I was emotionally bracing myself thinking, oh, there's probably going to be some like heart-wrenching thing where like, you know, Anduin is like upset or coming to terms with, his own legacy.
Mm-hmm.
I was prepared for him to kind of be acting tormented. And then instead we got, Sylvanas monologuing at the Wisp. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that was quite disappointing in a way because that
Yeah.
transition from cinematic A to cinematic
Yeah.
B was that A could have definitely been built more upon. Like we had the cinematic of Sylvanas, like you said, with the flashbacks and everything. That Sylvanas cinematic was actually very complete. It was a very good cinematic. It went through her recent past, her old past, and combination of the two, and then Uther also saying things that felt very relevant to everything that's going on for her psychologically. And towards the end of the cinematic, we even go through her whole thought process to the point where she accepts that she is still her. Both Sylvanas's, the old version and the version that's burnt Teldrassil are in fact one person, and I think it felt like a very complete and full story. And with this one, I think at this point, what a lot of us maybe expected was a similar treatment for Anduin. Maybe go through different flashbacks of him, with the jailer and what's been going through in his head and the push back and forth with his mind as he's getting controlled. Could have been really interesting to see. But instead, it kind
Yeah.
of snaps into this other situation, which on its
Yeah.
own is not that interesting either.
Yeah, and like, I know we want to get into how the other characters don't say much to the Arthas Wisp, but they also don't really say much to Anduin. Like that could have been something
Yeah,
else to
it's like it's
explore. I mean,
forgotten. Mm-hmm.
Jaina doesn't say much to that. Uh, Sylvanas doesn't say anything to uh Anduin really as well, which, I think that could have been an effective moment because we had all those cinematics of build up where Anduin was trying to convince Sylvanas that her way of thinking was flawed. So I think that could have been really interesting if Sylvanas had like a and Anduin doesn't know that Sylvanas's spirit has been reunited either. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that that could have been a very interesting exchange of Sylvanas trying to talk to him when like her first words of her as her like complete self. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe Uther wouldn't have as much to say to Anduin, but there's also the thing of, well, there could, Bolvar could have been doing something as well. I mean, Bolvar is basically like Anduin's dad when Varian wasn't present.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think, with how the cinematics or models have gotten better at showing emotional reactions, I think that you could have had the second half of the cinematic just Anduin reuniting with these characters right in front of him, since it was done so effectively with Varian and Sourfang. So I think that was kind of a missed opportunity not to focus on Anduin, because there's a lot more they could have uh,
Mm-hmm.
done with him, especially with like a really delicate situation where he was kind of
Mm-hmm.
possessed and acting against his will, and like the anxiety and trauma fallout from that. It just seemed to pivot abruptly away from him.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's what I would have liked to have seen in the second half of the cinematic.
Mm-hmm. It is
What we actually
true.
got. Yeah, go ahead.
As a last comment to that, it is true that we do still have potential more story coming out with the last part next week after the jailer fight, which might build on this and maybe would explain why we don't see more story behind this. But for now, as a sort of isolated cinematic, it does feel like Anduin didn't get a proper full story, because by watching it we're still not sure where is he mentally, psychologically, what has he gone through, in terms of that mental battle, because at the sort of peak of it, he breaks out and then it's as if he's forgotten, right? Because the
Well,
focus
like
goes to
Taronja
Sylvanas.
with like Elune, like she has this big reveal, and like there's they fit in all this dialogue, and then it just kind of once the exposition is communicated to the player, it's like okay, cinematic is over, and it's like, well, shouldn't Taronja have some moment of like, like, why don't
Mm-hmm.
my people all still die? Like I just feel like the
Mm-hmm.
post, I think the characters don't really get time to just kind of
Mm-hmm.
unpack and breathe and like kind of get back to themselves but are still dealing with their feelings
Mm-hmm.
but
And
yeah
and then in comparison or in contrast, again, Sylvana cinematic was very complete. In my opinion, at least, it felt very
yes
complete, and it went through many different parts of her, including the mental battle to then come to a conclusive
yeah
thing.
I mean it definitely still had flaws where it felt like blue Sylvanas good, red Sylvanas bad, even though that wasn't the intention, and I
Yeah.
think it's sort of been good if that cinematic tried to make more current Sylvanas sympathetic, because it definitely felt like her older version was just kind of like berating
Yeah.
the more recent version,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that gray area in the middle of like, well, but you know, Sylvanas possessed by the jailer was beloved by the Forsaken and made the Undercity. Like that whole period was glossed over, but
Mm-hmm.
I do agree that it had like a beginning, middle, end, focused
Mm-hmm.
on one character.
Mm-hmm.
Um, had good dialogue with Uther. There weren't a lot of characters just standing around
Yeah.
saying nothing. The visuals were, very striking, whether it was the two Sylvanas talking to each other with the color contrasts, or Teldrassil in the background. Like it was every minute felt and looked very emotional. Like if you just saw a still of it, you're like, wow, like some deep stuff is going down.
Mm-hmm.
But with this, it was more like a lot of characters just sitting in the background, not saying a lot. And then the second half, especially, not a ton of uh, arresting visuals. So
Mm-hmm. But let's talk about the second part of the cinematic then,
yeah,
as its own part. So we have this thing that happened with Anduin in front of Uther, Jaina, and Sylvanas, and we see this sort of wisp soul coming out of the sword.
yeah, and uh, the positioning is interesting because you have Jaina over one shoulder and then this wisp over Anduin's other shoulder. And I was saying how previous to the sword splitting, Anduin was kind of doing a very Arthas pose, plunging the sword into the ground with the magic tendrils coming out of it. So it's interesting how like it is kind of like good influence, bad influence on both
Mm-hmm.
sides of him, like from different parts of his legacy. Um, and then this wisp keeps floating, and then it basically turns into like a lengthy monologue with Sylvanas to the Arthas wisp. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's decent character development for her, but it's also she basically just talks to this wisp, and uh, no one else says anything about Arthas. Like you'd think Jaina would have to say a lot about Arthas, or Uther, especially because Uther threw him into the maw. You'd think
Mm-hmm.
Bolvar would want to say something about Arthas.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just Sylvanas monologuing, and I mean there's several issues I have, but I think the biggest issue was how if you compare it to when Jaina has to confront her um past failures in BFA in the Blighted Lands, uh she's tormented by spirits from her past, and like they all line up and you can see them, And here, I think it would have been more effective if Sylvanas had like more of a visual like personification of Arthas. If you actually saw Arthas as like a spectral figure that she was trying to talk to instead of this kind of blue wisp.
Mm-hmm.
So I think yeah, just visually it was not very exciting, especially after you had the really cool Death Knight and then like golden characters in the first half.
Yeah, because it turned into a it's mostly a close up of Sylvanas and the Wisp, and while the story itself is touching, you know, like Sylvanas did have a story with Arthas, and her coming to terms with it in a way is powerful. It I think it feels a little bit off because it comes after the Anduin story. So in my mind, it feels like this isn't relevant right now because I want to focus Anduin. But in general, I think it is a like a nice sort of revelation to have there for Sylvanas with seeing Arthas here. But then having said that, it also feels a little bit empty with the other characters not saying anything because they also had personal stories with Arthas as well. Like Jaina had an actual relationship, and Uther with the Maw. So it feels I'm very curious why they decided to make it this way because it
Yeah,
doesn't
and the
feel like
continuity.
it doesn't feel like a very obvious direction. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Plus, like, if you look at the early part, like 15 seconds in, you have like Sylvanas like yelling um and like trying and I think reaching out to Anduin when he's trying to do his big Death Knight explosion. So like
Mm-hmm.
she seems very concerned. She's trying to prevent him from giving in to the jailer, and then like we don't once he's freed, we don't see her like rush over or like say anything to him. Like her body language is just like the wisp. So I think that it's interesting exposition that she's reflecting on Arthas and his legacy and hers, but you know, like a minute before, she was really concerned about Anduin, and you think that she would maybe try to see if he was okay or, you know, express a complicated reaction to, wow, I turned you into this Death Knight, and I'm
Yeah.
really glad you were free and also guilty about what I did. Like, I feel like there could have been a very interesting moment between her and Anduin, but she just laser focused on the Wisp.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems a bit I don't know. It feels a bit maybe it's good for the narrative purpose, but it feels a little uh out of character with her, you know, current state to just not care that, you know, Anduin was back to himself.
Mm-hmm. Is it
Um,
Sylvanas' legs that's running towards Anduin there?
yeah, I thought that's what it was too.
Mm. Yeah, I see
Um
it now.
yeah, that's definitely her leg at 14 seconds cuz you have the super pointy boot with the silver accents on it.
I'm gonna show stream here. Taking a screenshot. Yeah, I just paused here with the CC and it says that Sylvana says Anduin.
Yeah. So it's like she is rushing towards him. Maybe she's almost about. You could even argue that maybe she's about to like, I don't know, sacrifice
Sacrifice
herself or try
herself.
to, you know, block this. You know, put herself in like the direct blast of the attack,
Mm-hmm.
trying to save him or protect the others. And I think it's a missed opportunity for her to actually say something to Anduin now that both of them are freed from the jailer. I think that could have been a very interesting reunion that
Yeah,
we
I
didn't
agree. That could
really
have been a
quite get.
good interaction. Yeah. But instead, it's kind
Yeah.
of like forgotten about and put more focus on Arthas, um, which
Yeah,
isn't
like
a bad
even going
story
back
itself, but it just feels off.
yeah, like going back to the whole Jaina BFA thing, like when Jaina is freed with her mom, like they have this, you know, very dramatic hug at the end.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's also because Jaina was on bad terms with her mom earlier in BFA, and they needed this like emotional conclusion. Now, I'm not saying Sylvanas is like super into, hugging people, but I feel that it would have been more satisfying if these characters just tried to comfort and, reconnect with Anduin and have that be the second half of the cinematic. Um, and yeah, it
Or what
just
if
seems
she would
super out of
try
character
to
that.
hug because she's
Yeah.
changing, and then Anduin is changing at the same time, so he
Yeah.
pushes her away. Imagine that interaction. It's like, no, go
Yeah.
away.
Or
you
maybe
you
Anduin
caused
is like,
this.
oh, like, you got out too? Like, I'm happy, but, like, I need time to reflect on what you did to me. Like, something that could hint that he's still working through. Like, he can't forgive her. He's gonna be
Yeah.
mature, but he's not gonna, like, forgive her off the bat because she was the reason why he ended up in, Sepulchre. So I think both of them have a lot of feelings of guilt and like
Yeah.
what was their actions versus what did the jailer make them do. And yeah, I think that they should have had another little conversation because we had so many in the start of Shadowlands showing how their dynamic changed. I think having one now with how both of them are freed would be interesting. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I
missed
agree.
opportunity there.
And I think Anduin has always been seen as, passive and just wants peace, like no matter what. So I
Yeah.
think having a little interaction there of him, actually not accepting Sylvanas and, being maybe the one who pushes her away the most from the whole,
Mm.
little crew there who apparently
Yeah.
are accepting her. I think that could have also been a nice contrast because there obviously are people who are not happy with Sylvanas getting a potential, redemption. So having Anduin push her away would be a nice, like, find at least someone, understands how bad Sylvanas has been. I think it could be a nice character development from Anduin's part too.
Yeah, and also just show that, like, even though Anduin has his armor and his sword back, Anduin is not doing super great after how he's been treated, and he has some anger and, trauma and grief to process. He's not just gonna, like, bounce back and become a golden lion again. So
Yeah.
I think that if he just had some lines with, reacting in a slightly more like emotional, anxious way to either Sylvanas or Jaina, I think that could have been interesting. And yeah, I also think, talking about father figures, since we had Varian and Sourfang, it's like we could have had Bolvar as well as like, well, this is one father figure that is still alive that you can connect with, like bringing Anduin from his past into the present. And it's like, Bolvar maybe has been changed by the jailer. Anduin maybe has psychological scars from the jailer, but like they're both like alive and can celebrate that. But yeah, so what we did get, as opposed to all that, we had a lot of shots of Sylvanas and Uther with the Arthas wisp in the center. And Sylvanas basically talks about how, there's nothing much less, not much is left of Arthas. Not even a soul for judgment. And she kind of mocks him and then also says that she was hunting him, but she turned herself into Arthas as well, which is, decent self-reflection and shows that this is how she's, grappling with her legacy and taking some responsibility for it. How she turned into him. Like, in this thing, she's not like, oh, the jailer made me into him. She's like, I
did.
acted in ways that,
Yeah.
Maybe the jailer nudged me, but I acted in ways that set me down that path as well. So, she says, I hated you, hunted you, and with each selfish act, became you. That is my burden to bear. Oops, did not mean to have that there. But yeah, so I think that was an interesting line, and I think that was good. It's in the game. But if I just wanted to see Sylvanas and Uther and the Wisp, I feel like that could have been a quest. I don't know if we needed a cinematic for this. Like, I think it would have
Very
been cooler if
true.
we had like spectral Arthas present, maybe even talking back. Like maybe the Wisp could have been like, oh, but like I was acting under the jailer's orders, and Sylvanas could have been like, no, she's like, I was too, but I'm taking responsibility for some things, you need to as well, you were selfish, you were prideful. I think that could be interesting if like Arthas was like trying to talk back to her in some way, and we saw her. I think that it also would have made it feel more satisfying that like,
Yeah.
finally Sylvanas gets the last word against Arthas, like she gets to confront him for what he did and also be like, you're nothing. At least, I'm something and I have this complicated legacy, but at least I'm, continuing my existence unlike you. I think that
Mm-hmm.
that would have more impact if she could just, be yelling directly at Arthas's face or have him try to defend himself and
Mm-hmm.
we explore the dynamic of like, well, what is the jailer responsible for versus you know, were you acting in a way that was flawed that could have taken you down a similar path? But instead, yeah, she's just talking to this wisp that isn't really talking back to her.
Yeah, no, it's actually a very good point you made here because the fact that it's a monologue, she's talking just by herself for the most part, and she's just looking at a wisp and there is nothing else happening graphic wise either. It does feel like an unnecessary scene to have in a cinematic. So if they were gonna have this sort of revelation in a cinematic, then it would have made more sense to make it more properly interacting between the characters. Have a spirit version of Arthas be out that then maybe goes into becoming a wisp or something, so that
Even
we.
been in like that idealistic like Silver Moon place that she was in her mind.
Yeah, like
In the
it could
other
even go
cinematic
into her mind.
continuity.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that could have also worked out. Just having more visuals, more things
Yeah.
happening, a model for Arthas,
Mm.
instead of like, oh, this is Arthas' latest model, a wisp.
Because I was like,
uh,
at first I saw the wisp and I was like, is this like a night elf? Like,
yeah.
like that's what I think when I see a wisp. So
Yeah, I think if we could have had some kind of memory version of him or a spirit version of him that's interacting with Sylvanas, with Uther, maybe asking Uther like why or something, like a little bit more interaction there would have made a bit more sense because yeah, a monologue like that did feel unnecessary in a cinematic.
yeah, the Uther thing is interesting because in the Bastion afterlives, Uther is, he's got this wound in his soul. He's very angry at Arthas, and he throws Arthas into uh, the maw.
Yeah.
And then we also see how Devos had some very good points that the Kyrian were kind of sticking their heads in the sand, and then that character development got derailed when she just, had her character jump abruptly forward and join the jailer and then die in the dungeon. Um, and then, Uther pivoted more to, hey, maybe I should have been more, respectful of Arthas or not giving into feelings of rage. And then 9-1 is about grappling with his past with Arthas, how he was a mentor and maybe he could have supported, his student better. And it was very interesting and touching, almost to the point where you're like, okay, Uther, maybe you're beating yourself up too much for what happened.
Yeah.
Um, and there was always kind of this like mystery element of, well, what was the impact of throwing Arthas's soul into the maw? Like, did that
Did it affect
contribute to
anything?
breaking
Yeah.
some machinery of death? Like, we know more now that Argus was involved, but it's like, did fast tracking such a powerful soul do anything? Did the jailer take his spirit? I mean, I guess this is in Anduin's armor now. But he just says nothing in this cinematic.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd think he'd have a lot to say after the whole expansion. He went from
Feeling
feelings
guilt.
of rage and
Yeah.
then guilt for throwing him into the maw. Like, you'd think he
Some
would have
kind of
just had something.
resolution. Yeah.
Yeah, and he just doesn't. Like, he
Yeah.
just sits there.
Yeah.
And, like, maybe he could be, like, if Sylvanas is taking the angle that Arthas was terrible, but they need to take, like, responsibility for their actions, they can't just blame it on the jailer, Uther could have been like the opposite perspective of, like, I knew Arthas when he was, a paladin, and I agree he did bad things, but also I need to break the cycle of hate and not throw people into the maw. And yeah,
Yeah.
you'd think that Uther would just say something like, Arthas, like, you were a terrible person, but I should have not interfered, or,
Mm-hmm.
I should not have followed your path of vengeance. Like, I think we need something
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Yeah, maybe
Like,
Uther
the
doing that.
final. Yeah.
Maybe Uther doing that sped up the whole process of getting the spirit into the weapon and doing all this to
Yeah.
Anduin as well. And so indirectly, both Sylvanas and Uther can be partially blamed for what happened, but neither of them said anything to Anduin.
No. And yeah, it's like, yeah, and you think also Uther has that connection where um Uther was present when Anduin was controlled by the jailer and did the attack on the leader of Bastion. Like, he puts his hand over
Yeah,
the, and you'd
chest.
think that he would want to offer some words of comfort to Anduin, like, oh, like, my son, like, you know, I knew that was not you in Bastion, like, I'm so happy to see you with my own eyes, or, like, like, your father would be proud, like, just
Something.
something.
Yeah.
um but yeah, like, all these characters just sort of drop Anduin to watch Sylvanas monologue at the Wisp, and you're like, yeah, like, Uther just has so much to say to uh Arthas, especially when they had that iconic exchange, like that really iconic visual of, Uther, like, grabbing Arthas up and then throwing him into the maw. Like, that
Mm-hmm.
was a really big visual. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it would have been cool if we had an actual figure of Arthas's body, so we could, like, parallel that pose in some form.
Agree.
So,
Yeah.
like,
We
maybe they
100%
could
should
be
have had
like,
a spirit version of him that
yeah,
towards the end turns into a wisp and shatters or whatever.
yeah.
Um, but so you could have still had the same conclusion, still
Mm.
had a Arthas that's being vanished from everything, but having a model of him would make the whole scene more effective.
Also, like, where was Arthas going to go? Like, that's an interesting mystery.
Yeah.
Like, even that there was a throwaway line, like, oh, my son, you would have been destined for Revendreth, or, like, your soul was so heinous it would have gone to the maw, but it was not my choice to make. Like, I think that would have been interesting closure as well. Because, with Sylvanas, it's like we learned that in that fairy tale book, that I think her soul was meant to go to Ardenweald. So to me, it's I think that adds to a sense of regret. Like, what if Arthas was meant to go to a place that wasn't the Maw, and now the jailer, because of Uther being rash and the jailer using him, there's not even enough of Arthas to, be rehabilitated. Like, Uther throwing him into the Maw, like, destroyed what was left of Arthas's soul, and the guilt that comes with that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, we just got the Wisp.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, Jaina and Bolvar, like, Jaina, was in a relationship with Arthas, and we learned in BFA was plagued by doubt, because, she wouldn't stand by Arthas' side with the culling of Stratholme. Like, that was like too much for her. Like, her and Uther abandoned Arthas there, and we saw that in the flashback. And, like, Jaina would blame herself that she didn't give Arthas enough support. Like, maybe she could have changed his mind if she tried harder. So for her to just stand there as well and not say anything is also very not
Strange.
satisfying.
Yeah.
And, like, I think, like, maybe all three characters, like, if, maybe we see, like, we have Arthas's body, and when Sylvanas talks to Arthas, it's, like, in Silvermoon, and when Uther talks to Arthas, it's, like, on Icecrown background, and then when Jaina talks to Arthas, it's outside Stratholme again. But I think that would have added a lot of impact to these characters finally getting
Definitely.
to
Yeah.
confront him and just have, like, a bit of catharsis, how they can finally just say to Arthas what they want to say.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, Bolvar wasn't present, but it's like Bolvar got turned into the Lich King because Arthas tortured him. Like, I think he would have stuff to say as well.
Yeah.
But he's not there. And
Yeah.
yeah, again, I feel like Bolvar, confronting his predecessor, as well as reuniting with Anduin, his surrogate son. I think that would have been very emotional.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we know that Blizzard has a tech to make characters hug now, as we saw with,
Oh yeah.
Person Clea.
I remember.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I think if they wanted to pivot to Arthas, they could have pivoted in a way that would also be more emotional with flashier visuals.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my take on the whole Arthas pivot.
Yeah.
And it's also like, is his story over now? Like, is this good or bad? Like,
Yeah,
it
that's the
seems kind of
final.
done.
That's the final thing on it. Like, does
Yeah, it's
this
not
mean
like
it's just over?
Yeah, it's not like the Elune cinematic where it's like, well, I guess Elune's talking through Tyrande and we don't have a model, but there's some unfinished business. Elune's still around. I'm sure we'll see her in
Mm-hmm.
10.0. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not something where it felt incomplete, but maybe we'll see more at a later point. It's like, Arthas is a wisp. There is not enough of his soul to be judged. Goodbye, Arthas. Hope you're forgotten. And it's like, well, okay, that sounds very cliched, Sylvan. It's like Arthas is not going to be forgotten by anyone. And
Yeah.
again, Uther, it's like, are we just going to drop the whole line that he threw Arthas into the maw? Like,
Yeah, and I
it
wonder
felt very
also.
final.
I wonder if this could be why. Do you remember that? I don't know if it was a video or an interview or something where the devs were talking about how um, the story is supposed to conclude the Warcraft story,
Yeah,
and
like the arc from Warcraft 3.
so maybe this is also what they were kind of uh, like.
Yeah,
What's the word I'm looking for?
they could be
Kind of
hinting at.
referring to or hinting to,
Yeah,
because that's a big story from a very long time ago. So maybe this is their way of ending a lot of those type of strings, so that they can start something fresh soon enough.
yeah. I mean, I could see how that ties in. I mean, how Warcraft 3 we traced Arthas' story and then how he became the Lich King and like the mayhem that caused, and now it's like, you know, we're moving on beyond Arthas, but it's also like, should we have done that? Like, should we have had more Bolvar, like, a confrontation between Bolvar and
Mm-hmm.
Arthas, I think would have been very interesting,
Mm-hmm.
or Sylvanas and Arthas. Um,
I think
we even got
having
those statues of Arthas. Remember
yeah
leading up to Shadowlands? Like, we
yeah
have his
I was
helm.
expecting more. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it is a nice way to end his story. But yeah, the execution of it in terms of the conversations between the characters did feel lacking. Only Sylvanas really got to say something, and I think in his ending part, I think seeing an updated kind of like a broken spiritual version of him would have felt more effective in a way. But I think it being the end of him, that is all that's left of him, is a kind of like a peaceful ending to it.
It's interesting because, like, going with the pacing of the cinematic, I feel like, Anduin breaking free is like one very emotional moment. Like, it's like a high point of the cinematic. And
Mm-hmm.
like the Arthas stuff just seems almost very like chill and quiet after.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if it was the focus of the cinematic, similar to how the Sylvanas one had her own focus, and
Mm-hmm.
how like it was these two versions arguing and conflicting, and then like it reached this like fever pitch of acceptance where new Sylvanas like kind of realizes that things are shit and this is her legacy. Um, I think if we had these characters confronting Arthas separately and like they're working through their pain and they're like reliving all these horrible things, and it's like, well, what do we go from here? Like, they were living all these vivid memories, and it's like, well, we can't just be angry and stuck in the past. We have to move forward. Arthas, you're nothing, and then it peacefully goes away. I think
Mm-hmm.
that would have been very emotional and effective. But right now, it's just like Sylvanas kind of just saying her part, and it almost feels like an afterthought after the main story of Anduin. While in reality, like,
It could be its own
all the
thing.
characters that were
Yeah.
wronged by Arthas could have been saying their things, and then it's like, well, saying it felt good, but it's not enough. Like, we need to move forward, live our own lives. Arthas, you're no longer controlling us. And then, like, they walk away and you see a wisp. I think that would have been effective.
Mm-hmm.
Like, remember at the end of, like, Icecrown Citadel, like, we think we're about to lose, and then, like, all the spirits in Frostmourne, like, just swarm
Mm-hmm.
and take him down. It's like we needed that type of like emotional energy with Arthas again. Like just this like rage of those who were wronged getting to say their piece before he goes away. But yeah, I agree
Yeah.
that I think ending something peacefully um is like a very kind of bittersweet note,
Yeah.
especially with how even before Arthas had turned, it was all like, "Oh, Arthas, like you're the prince. Everyone will sing about you. You're destined for great things." Like he was always in the spotlight, and so I think it's bittersweet how he can just kind of fade away as this generic, wisp, kind of just like lost in the Shadowlands. I think that's kind of a very bittersweet ending for him. But we didn't the journey to reach it, I think, should have been a lot more
More
visual
elaborate,
and fleshed out more.
more visual, more input from the people that he affected, and
Yeah.
yeah. But about the overarching idea of it ending in a sort of peaceful way, I think is a bittersweet sort of ending. I think it works. But yeah, the execution for it could have been more powerful for sure, and especially after the very powerful Anduin moment that we just saw with the spirit of Varian, spirit of Sarfang. In contrast, it does feel not as powerful. But what do we expect to potentially see next week after the jailer
Yeah.
encounter?
So there I think were 4 hidden cinematics. Um and we haven't seen all of them yet.
How many
But
have we
this was
seen
one.
now?
I think this might have been the first one, but like one was pretty short, so I think one was maybe like a little like inter-boss transition. So
Okay.
maybe there's 2 more that are coming, so my guess would be something with like Sylvanas and Tyrande and then something with the jailer.
Was this the
Although who knows, we
longest
could
one?
get. Yeah, I think this is the longest one.
Okay.
This was nearly 3 minutes long. So um, we know that there are 3 bosses, including the Dreadlords, and then the final one being the Jailer. We know there is some sort of like little intro cutscene where the Jailer is talking about, like this is him setting all of his plans in motion, and he has all these cosmic plans, and all these villains were just pawns for his scheme, and he's waving his hand over a cosmic map of Azeroth, where Northrend is. So we know that it starts that way, and then we know in the encounter that the uh, the jailer has lots of abilities that sound like he is targeting Azeroth directly. Some of the stage names seem to have throwbacks to phases from past end bosses. Like we have the Unmaking, with Argus the Unmaker. We have the Origin of Domination that sounds like one of the Titan Forge phases from the N'Zoth encounter. And in the stage, the Unmaker, we have abilities like there's a lot of Azeroth. We've got an ability called World Shatter, where the jailer, shatters Azeroth. We've got the Blood of Azeroth present. We have there's a lot of Azeroth sounding things here, and in one of the press kit pictures, the jailer is in front of this very yellowy as Azerite type beam, very BFA vibes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, then there's Desolation. The jailer launches a deadly attack on Azeroth, reducing Azeroth's life force by up to 20%. So my guess is that we could almost have, maybe we'll get some sort of throwback to the Legion ending cinematic, some sort of throwback to the attacks on Azeroth there, because the Legion encounter, we had Argus the Unmaker, and then that pivoted abruptly to Sargeras throwing the sword at Azeroth. And now we have the jailer, who we've learned used Argus to he's attacking Azeroth. So are we going to have to defend Azeroth in this ending cinematic again and get back to Azeroth, and or is there going to be another sword in Silithus or Northrend now?
Yeah. Do you think there'll be a continuation, or not a continuation, but a development of the sword itself? Because the sword is just like
Yeah,
chilling
I mean,
in Azeroth
they
now.
said in one interview that
Yeah.
like we haven't seen the last of the sword.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that could be interesting.
Yeah. Interesting.
Um, it's also like if we are learning now that the jailer is, doing things with Azerite, maybe if we defeat the jailer, that could, I don't know, cleanse some of Silithus in some way.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, or I don't know, maybe Azeroth will like just wake up and wave around the sword.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if anything with the sword will happen. Maybe not now, maybe not with these raid cinematics, but potentially in 10.0 or something. I think that would be interesting. And I think it's also nice with all these hints towards things going back to Azeroth.
Yeah, I have to wonder if we'll get some sort of cosmic intervention to win, because it's I know that everyone laughs that the jailer is set up as a master manipulator, but uh he's not a fully fleshed out villain, or it's always like, I will let you go this time and I will come back later. Like it feels very cliched.
Yeah.
But I think it would be interesting if similar to the Arthas encounter, it seems at first that we're about to lose, and then we get some help from some sort of cosmic force in the cinematic to defeat the jailer, especially because the jailer's whole deal is, I've, turned the cosmic forces against each other and, weakened them. So it would be interesting if we get some help from, like, I don't know, the first ones, or like Azeroth herself. No, maybe Azeroth finally wakes up.
Mm-hmm.
Or just some bigger force from the Shadowlands helping us take down the jailer.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think any of the cinematics are like BFA Sourfang length long, so
No.
I don't think a ton is going to happen. I mean, I'm sure something will happen, but I think it will be pretty open ended.
Mm-hmm.
And we
I'm not
still don't know
sure.
what the expansion is. Go ahead.
No, we don't. I was gonna say
Yeah.
I'm not sure what would feel satisfying in terms of the fate of the jailer in general,
Right.
because everything went so fast with him. Like we suddenly got to know him, and we're already fighting
Mm.
him, and apparently he's been the mastermind for so long, but we just didn't know. So defeating him won't feel that great, and if he gets away, maybe that could lead to something later. But then it doesn't feel nice to prolong this story that we have already.
Especially if they're like, oh, we can't have Arthas because we're done with, uh,
Yeah,
prep-free
be-
story.
because if we prolong the jailer story, that means that we're prolonging the Anduin story and the Sylvana story, and
Mm.
I don't think we want that either. So it's yeah, I don't know. We're in a weird spot here where I'm not sure what would be exciting to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think like what I would find the most exciting
Mm-hmm.
was if I know like the whole first one's lore has lost a lot of people in 9-2. Like it's just
Mm-hmm.
so out there. So I think if they did something cosmic that hit closer to home, like, Azeroth waking up and pulling the sword out and stabbing the jailer, like something that's big and goofy and cosmic, but is like relatable,
Mm,
as opposed to,
something
like
crazy. Yeah.
fractals and, like prototype printing, just something that's accessible and looks really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And, high fantasy. I think that would be exciting, or, going back to all the Dragonflight rumors, like maybe like some, I don't know, like the forces, if the jailer is attacking Azeroth, maybe like the Dragonflight or some protectors of Azeroth fight back in some way, and that could open the door to the expansion of, what happens now if the
Mm-hmm.
Dragonflights are getting their magic back, or if Azeroth is no longer slumbering. I think that could be an interesting way to add some, magical, high tier cosmic things back into the lore, but making it more relatable because it's on Azeroth instead of this, already magical realm.
Mm-hmm. I think I agree with that.
But yeah,
Something
what do you?
crazy with Azeroth herself becoming the solution to the fight could
Yeah,
be fun and interesting. I think otherwise, I almost want to say that I think it's best that the jailer doesn't die. That he somehow gets away. Maybe that can be done in a way that doesn't have to drag on the entire story. Maybe there's a way for him to just leave this behind and we go back to, like, something more about him. Um, that we don't have to get back to in 10.0 at all. Maybe sometime in the future, like later
I
on.
mean, like Illidan is off in the sky. I mean, going
Yeah.
back to Arthas, I think it would have been interesting if Arthas got the Illidan spotlight treatment, and not saying make him into a good guy, but we were able to take Illidan back and give
Mm-hmm.
him the focus of some stories, and also bring back Illyria and Turalyon and Legion. So I think that we could have definitely, Blizzard knows how to bring back an old character with a good nostalgia twist, and I think that they could have done something with Arthas there. But yeah, back to
True.
the jailer.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think in a similar fashion, maybe something like that could be done because it feels really bad to have an expansion of a character that's been behind everything ever and we just defeat them. I
Yeah.
think that feels bad. But I'm curious to see how they'll do it. I think having. That's how I see it. I think I would like the jailer to not be entirely defeated, but be gone somewhere. We don't know where. And we will not
Yeah,
see him
I think
anytime
as they
soon,
yeah, like if they're not gonna do something like big and flashy like
like Azeroth
Azeroth,
herself.
yeah,
Yeah.
stabbing the
Mm-hmm.
jailer, I think that when if they go, it's weird when they try to tell a story that's somewhat nuanced, but then like they abandon it, kind of like Anduin's control is a Death Knight. Let's abandon, his cinematic when he's free. I think that it would be more interesting to be like, the jailer is this master task, master planner. What happens if we don't totally win, or there's, some big mess he caused in his wake, like, Deathwing
Mm-hmm.
in Cataclysm.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it would be interesting to get out of the Shadowlands, but explore the mess left behind by his, gigantic cosmic war.
Yep.
So,
Indeed.
and I still would like more quests with, Anduin reconnecting with all of his, friends and family. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Sylvanas reflecting more on Arthas. The other characters reflecting on Arthas. I mean, who knows? Maybe, I mean, I've been doing the show, but maybe users will start reporting that, in a few days or weeks, there's, more gossip options with NPCs kind of like after the Fourth War. I mean, that could be something, but I do think that because Arthas was such a big part of the story that
Yep.
there should have been like a dramatic cinematic for the main characters to react and, grieve and move on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with that.
So,
I
um
think that was all of the things that I kind of wanted to comment about the cinematic. Is there anything else that you feel we haven't talked about?
I mean, just the whole Illidan thing that popped into my head, how Blizzard has shown they can bring back old characters
Mm-hmm.
and, give them an interesting cameo appearance
Mm-hmm.
before putting them back in the vault again. And I think Arthas could have definitely had that, especially with how uh the reception and, length of Shadowlands has gone. I think that
Could have spent some of that
that
time
you
doing that.
yeah, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
also just it just feels like that could have been a, crowd pleaser to bring people back in to the game. Not saying make Arthas good, but more like Arthas is in the patch as opposed to like fight the jailer, and you're like, who? Like,
Yeah.
um I think that's a good way to bring people back in, especially if there are, all these rumors about Wrath of the Lich King Classic. I think that it would have been cool to, you know, give Arthas like a little bit of a reboot or high definition model, because that did seem to be one of like the, strongest, iconic bits of
Mm-hmm.
storytelling that the team has done that, is consistently remembered. So,
What if you
I
fight the
think
jailer and then mid through everything, Arthas pops out of him?
I think that'd be. I mean, it's funny because he just did that with Anduin, but it could be interesting. To have. I mean, I think I don't think it will happen, but
No, because he's gone
I
now,
mean,
right?
yeah, he's just a soul that's fading away.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I do think that yeah, I just think that we sometimes say that the cinematics are like too open ended, like the BFA one with Ashara ending on cliffhangers, and it's like, well, this is one situation where maybe we shouldn't have just you know been like the end Arthur story, no subtlety, bam, wisp, he can't even talk back, the end.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I see what you mean. It's kind of like a potential missed opportunity to bring back an iconic character in a good way. Maybe sometimes leaving things open ended
yeah,
allows more opportunities to do cool things like that. And now it's like gone, so it feels a bit empty.
yeah. Um, And yeah, I just think that, a lot of people that have even stopped playing WoW remember Arthas, so they might
Mm-hmm.
have been curious to see what was up
Mm-hmm.
with him.
Mm-hmm.
Um but yeah, I think that is about it. We are continuing to put up guides for the new stuff that's coming out. Like as we were doing the show, we have a How to Reach Zereth Mortis World Boss article that's up.
Mm-hmm.
We have like some season 3 things to do, raid guides, guides highlighting how good various tier sets are, and we keep data mining various hot fixes for things like trinkets or class tuning.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, um, should be an exciting week of uh,
New things to do.
content
Yep.
and new things to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess we will see you next week discussing that end of the raid reveal jailer cinematic.
Yeah.
If the jailer is difficult, it might be we might do the show at a weird hour again, but we'll have to see. I mean, it depends how
Yeah.
if he's really difficult, we may not see that cinematic for a while, but we will do our best.
Yeah, because in this case, they also had PTR practice and stuff, and for next time,
Yeah.
there won't be any, so
Nope.
we'll see. May have to be
Yeah.
another day. Um, but yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in and watching and supporting Wowhead. We really wanted to get the show going today, even if it was at a slightly later time, to make sure that we have the cinematic to cover so we don't cover it a week later. And yeah, it feels good to talk about it when it's still fresh in the mind. And feel free to check it out yourself. It's technically published by World of Warcraft or Blizzard, but it's unlisted. So if you want to find it,
Mhm.
what you can do is go to wowhead.com and you'll see the article there, which links to it. And then you can watch it yourself in your own time. And there's also CC available if you're like me, where you sometimes can't hear what characters are saying. So you can for people who may not have English as the first language, then you can read what exactly is being said, because sometimes having the exact words can be quite crucial to what the story means. So that is available there, and yeah, we'll be back next week to cover whatever new cutscenes or cinematics that are waiting, and I'm excited to see where the story is gonna go.
Same. But yeah, thanks for all your support, and we will see you next week.
Yep,
Have
indeed.
fun in Smoker.
Yeah, have fun with your new stuff, new content, and see you all next week. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.